appending themselves to
It's making
each,
about them.
you know?
Yeah.
But then every once in a while, like one hits where you really feel it and really. So before we get into Norm Macdonald, I think it's so funny, and
Let's start this officially.
Okay, yeah.
Boom! It's hot mic. We're
Okay.
addressing the death of Norm Macdonald.
Yeah.
This is a tribute to him. Truly one of the greatest comics and comedians and comic writers to ever live, and we got to pay a little tribute to him.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, just of modern, and I was thinking about it too, and it's like, and of course, when they booted him off of Weekend Update, they replaced him with Colin Quinn. But it's like one of the last SNL people who really feels like they made it there primarily as a stand-up.
Truly.
You know, and even kind of, and Norm and Colin sort of defied that too, because it felt like that definitely in the 90s and then certainly by the early aughts, it was this far more like established pipeline of these people from, you know, the improv schools.
True.
You know,
yeah.
that everybody was like from
sketch comedians.
Yeah, like Second City and Groundlings sketch and improv performers and impressions and this and that. And Norm is like this timeless quality of like the tradition of the joke.
Yeah, he's the true joke writer.
Yeah, and he's like, and it's interesting too because it's like he belongs or has a place sort of in some ways with like with anti-humor or sort of it, but it's still it always comes to a joke, you know. And so he's in this weird way, he's like a and most of the obituaries and or you know tributes and little pieces I've read, I mean most everything brings up the fact that on some levels his humor defies description a little bit. You know?
I've never subscribed to him being anti-comedy. I know that he is oftentimes put under that umbrella, but I feel like it's only because the joke is, or a lot of his approaches to subjects are unconventional in that misdirection is what's expected, and then he gives the thing that is right in front of you. He states the obvious, and people think, it's like, well, that doesn't work for anyone else. Why is that funny? It's like his delivery, his construction of the joke, and the language around it, it made it funny to make you think. I think it's Jeselnik who talks about the way he writes his third thought.
Mm-hmm. And that's a super, like in improv.
Yeah.
They're talking all the time about third thought. That's one of those tenets because...
Is Norm first thought? What do you think? I mean, he didn't write just the same joke over and over.
Right.
He wrote, he would challenge himself. Like, I want to write the best knock-knock joke I can.
Well, and that's kind of it, is he's this like... So everybody who's doing comedy, right, has to at least on some level be like... is a fan of comedy and also like a student of comedy, you know? And so in the very much the same way now, because it's like I know... Well, yeah, you've just been informed by everybody who came before.
Yeah.
And also, and, you know, I mean, it's worth noting, like, comedy has a capacity and a predisposition to, a lot of ways, age terribly, right? Like, you look at some of the greats from, like, the 1980s and early 90s, and the conventions wrapped up around stand-up comedy are totally different.
True.
You know, and Norm Macdonald is in some way, he's like strangely like seems more timeless than that. That he could have hung with like the Catskills comedians in the 1950s or 1960s, or like been on those 1960s like Dean Martin roasts, you know, amongst Rickles, and because one thing I was thinking about a lot, because, you know, like everybody else, you know, it's like I went through and was watching old stuff and clips from, and it's weird and funny because he's so subversive and devil may care when he's young, Norm. And then he, in the last 10 to 15 years, he had taken on such a degree of like folksy wisdom.
Yes.
But the strangest thing is that in many ways, it's the same material. Certainly he's an older man, and so he's a little more like, you know, cranky or something outwardly. He'd like, you know, fallen into a place where he was critical of aspects of modern culture and would occasionally, you know, say things that would upset people more.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's the same guy as when he gets fired from SNL for just refusing to stop lambasting OJ.
That's right.
Know?
That was fantastic.
And so it's like, it's interesting because he had this same comic, and in that way, his jokes some of the times feel almost like outside of time.
Yeah.
You know, beyond time. Because it was like, this is funny.
We're so removed from the OJ trial, but you can go back to those, and the jokes
they're still good.
They're so good. Like after the verdict was announced, and he's like, "This just in, murder is legal in California.
Murder is legal in the state of California," and he puts up, and they're like, "Police authorities are now looking for 3 men seen leaving the Simpson Brown residence," and then it's just 3 sketches of OJ. Oh man! And then like he got fired, and because there was that specific producer or executive or something who was friends with OJ and didn't like him.
Don Imer or something like that. He was he was friends with OJ.
Yeah, and it was like, and then when they eventually brought Norm back to host an episode of SNL, he like blasted him again on his monologue. I mean, so he was. That's a funny thing about like you saying that that's what Jeselnik said, because I'm like, well, Norm could take it. You know? Norm could take it, and Norm could also be like brutal in his own. I mean, he had so many moments of like, I can't believe he just said that.
Oh, the thing about Jeselnik, I think I said it before we started, but that Jeselnik was on the Howie Mandel podcast, and they found out live, like in real time, that Norm had passed away, and Jeselnik was speechless, and he's like, I don't know what to say, and they were both of them were speechless for almost a minute, where they're just trying to gather themselves, and then they're like, God, I love that guy. Yeah. And Jeselnik was saying what an inspiration he was to him, but he also was like, yeah, I worked with him, and I kind of roasted him a lot, and to the point where Norm was even like, hey, I'm a guest host or a guest judge. Like, why is the host roasting me? Why are you doing this? Lay off. Funny. And he's like, I wish I had been a little bit nicer to him.
That's funny.
Yeah, so that's relating to what you were saying.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I do think Norm could take it.
I mean, you know, so there's actually too. Sam Talent, I think I've mentioned him to you before. But, so he's this guy. He's a great comedian. And he was based out of Denver for quite a while, and he's living in Fort Collins. And he wrote and self-published this great book. It's a novel. It's called Running the Light. Oh. And it's about this fictional tragic character comedian named Billy Ray Schaefer, who like had a moment of glory in the early 90s and shattered it because of hubris, and is still this like road comic in his 50s, just living this brutal life. And Norm Macdonald is a character in it.
Wow.
Where they recognize, and one of the things I always thought was like a masterstroke is that Sam wrote it, and the instant Norm shows up in the book, like, you can hear his voice. You know? And it's like, and I think, and it speaks to Sam's gift as a writer.
Yeah.
I think that he was able to like capture it, but then also I was like, there is a reason why one would choose Norm Macdonald for this. There's Norm Macdonald is like almost like I say this with all the love. It's strange that he was famous. Norm Macdonald is like a normal man who became famous and was famous for the majority of his adult life, who still seems more or less like a normal man, you know? And he never, like... Because there's so many people who, like, get taken by Hollywood or some aspect of the industry, and then they sort of, like... and some of them really, like, mature and season into it beautifully, but they become these, like... these monumental figures, and a lot of them turn into incredible shitheels, it seems like. And Norm always, at least, had this presence or this aspect, this idea that he was just like, just a guy.
Yeah.
You know? And that's something, I don't know, extra special.
I think it's extra special that he decided to perform. Because I think writing comedy could have been another avenue for him, that's just what he did.
Yeah.
But the fact that we got to experience him and not just his jokes, like he could just be a great writer for SNL or for...
There's something, I mean, again, you know, but there's something so disarming about the way that he did. So I watched the... his really long Conan joke about the moth, the doctor, you know, and how it just goes on and on and on. And it's like, that's a conventional, that is in some level, like, and we were talking before we started the podcast, we were talking about our labor jobs that we've had. And that's like, on some level, that's like a labor guy joke.
Yeah.
Or a grandpa joke or a barbershop joke.
Totally.
You know, these conventions of like, these things that just exist in the lineage of like conversation.
Yeah.
And he always did you know, because you mentioned like that he wanted to tell you, you know, the best knock joke or something. And it's like, and so he always did this thing of like recapturing classic comedy or the comic archetypes.
Yeah.
And then doing it as a professional in a way, because, you know, most stand-up comic were to tell you a knock joke or were to tell you some like yo mama kind of joke, a lot of people would feel ripped off.
Oh, it'd be like, we're paying for this?
Yeah, they'd be like,
we're at a comedy club and you're doing this material?
Right. It'd be like, I can't believe. I mean, but
that was the challenge for him. It was like, I want to take a classic magic trick and show it to you again, but I'm going to do it in my style, and I'm going to, in a way, perfect it.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to perfect it because now I've made it timeless.
Right. And that's like, and that's where it's like he had to be a writer. Or, I mean, had to be a performer.
Yeah.
Instead of just being a writer. Because it's like, on some level, you can't hand off and be like, well, this is like...
Yeah.
This is just part of the American canon, you know. Like I can't.
You're just retelling a story we've already heard.
I can't say this on TV.
It's like he's like, I'm going to steal a bit that's so old that no one knows who wrote it.
Yeah,
and I'm going to make it funny again. It's a joke.
Maybe now all of those classic bits have been written by Norm Macdonald.
Yeah.
What was the first joke that like what's a joke you remember like a dad or an uncle telling you at some point as a kid that has like stayed with you?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, classic joke form I can't think of. I
Can I
can think
tell
of
you?
funny Oh, yeah. If you've got one in the chamber, please.
I'll tell you two.
Yeah,
these were jokes. These were jokes. Someone off color that my dad really liked. That I recall at some point being like transmitted as wisdom. And these are still. It's like these two jokes are the jokes I think of if I'm in conversation with somebody or like at a party or something, and somebody introduces me and they're like, "Oh yeah, Nick's a comedian," and then that always fosters somebody being like, "Oh yeah, tell a joke," and and it's never a great setting.
No, that's terrible.
A good place to
I do this on a stage,
like run a bit.
Where everyone's facing me.
There's some conventions
there's
here that would actually be in favor of me, and there's ways in which
be funny now. That's
so I'll tell them these two chestnuts, and so the first one. What did the lepers say to the prostitute? You can keep the tip. Why did they have to cancel the leper hockey game? There was a face-off on center ice.
I should have seen that one.
So those are I mean, especially after
they're
tough back-to-back. But some leper jokes.
Those are classic beats in a joke.
Yeah,
like
classic,
that structure.
Those form structures.
Yep. Ask a question and then answer it.
And the quippy, and that it's like, and it's self-contained, and so that you have the both the suspense, but then in the release of the tension, there's people go, "Oh, I should have thought of that."
Yeah.
Oh, there's such an obviousness there. And so it's fascinating because Norm is somebody who seemed to perfect and stylize and utilize those forms in a way in which, because the crazy thing too, and you saying, Jeselnik writes third thought. I'm like, oh yeah, improv, they're always talking about third thought. And so the thing is you take somebody like an Anthony Jeselnik or a Doug Stanhope or this, that, those guys are still toying in those same conventions.
Yeah.
The thing about trying to be a sleek, modern doer of comedy who's still hanging in it is you don't want people to see the forms, the molds that you're pouring your humorous sensibilities into. And Norm Macdonald was particularly proud to make those apparent. So you're so that when he just keeps going on about that moth, Conan knows what is happening, and it's
is there a better interview on late night talk shows than Norm? Maybe Bill Burr. As far as guys who are able to do stand up while sitting down and make it conversational. Right. I feel like those two, maybe best isn't they're my favorites.
Sure.
Norm.
Yeah.
And Norm's dynamic with David Letterman was a lot different than his dynamic with Conan, where I think David Letterman was just so tickled and taken by Norm's style, his weird, unconventional style, and kind of this reserved nature of his comedy that was...
Right. Well, and that's the thing I was saying about him seeming like a regular guy.
Yeah.
Right. Is so many entertainers and now, and I remember, and I've no idea who wrote it. I mean, I think they're just probably a working comic of some level or degree. But I saw a tweet a while ago that was I hate that comedians are also hot now. They're the world has gotten worse, that there's also an expectation that comedians are also hot. Because it used to be, and I think what they were evoking specifically is it used to be these really weird people. But but Norm, just to see him walking down the street or have a random conversation with him, he still had like a strikingly normal. It's almost too. It's that conception of, they talk about how like that cliche that so many comedians are super tragic figures.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say from my experience of comedy that is in fact mostly true.
Yeah.
It is a total island of misfit toys kind of scenario. So whenever you find a comedian that seems plucky, they're like a strange outlier.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think he had some element of that. He seemed like a okay, normal guy.
Yeah.
And
I think he probably was
devastatingly funny.
Yeah, that's it.
And he was like, and as he got older, I think the ways, again, like the folksiness and the ways that he was like a strange old guy, I think they became more apparent.
Yeah.
But he never, especially with comedy, it's like so many people have to be so damn kooky, right? And when somebody's sincerely kooky, it works great in comedy. And then some of the times you see people and you're like, I think that person might be lying about their kookiness.
Sure.
There's nothing.
Well, Bobcat, Goldthwait.
Yeah.
He had to drop the bit. He was sick of doing the bit.
Mm-hmm.
And people were devastated. His they were like, you got to bring him back. He's like, no, that guy is dead. Norm was not a bit. It was his quirkiness.
Well, it's funny because I was thinking of Bobcat too, and it's like both these guys would have come up or had this rise late 80s, early 90s, right? It's like, and some people were like, disappointed by the disingenuous nature of Bobcat, even though you see him and you like totally know on some level, it's like, oh, this guy can't be real.
Yeah.
It's a weird way in which and I think you and I were talking about it on the Secret Unreleased podcast. But
I wonder when we're gonna release that.
I mean, once
Patreon.
Once you get the Patreon, get those numbers up, but it's like I've always thought about comedy, and I'm sure I'm not the first person who's talked about performing comedy, but specifically stand up like this. But it's like I really think about it as like, up here is me, my own understanding of myself, and I have insights into me. I know the whole origin story, so I have all the stuff, and so I know things about me that you and the audience can't know.
Yeah.
And then just as importantly over here is the assessments that the audience does make of me.
Okay.
Or the people who know me who aren't me know about me. And so there's this external view, and that certainly those people can see and understand things about me that I might not necessarily know or pick up on, and the comedy feels like you're trying to write and perform material for some space in between, right? Find a version of yourself where you're revealing more of yourself or like allowing that intimate, but that you also have to concede to and play to the expectations or how you strike other people, and that a lot of comedians at like open mics and everything, and when they're starting, a lot of them tell material that seems disingenuous to them, and people don't connect to it.
Yeah.
Because, and like the classic trope that I'll always mention, this is probably the same example I used on the Secret podcast.
Yeah.
But is like, I think of a college kid who shows up and tells jokes about cocaine and hookers. And you see some like squeaky faced like kid in his early 20s who's seems more dweebish than he does dangerous.
Okay.
And you go, I think he has made up his own proximity to cocaine and prostitutes for the sake of this joke. And it won't sail, because people aren't going to like go there with him.
They're not going to believe it.
Right.
I wonder if I've brought this up on a podcast yet, but this is about directing, but George Roy Hill talked about, and that's the director of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And when they started filming, Paul Newman was playing Butch really fun and silly. He was playing it real fast and loose. And George, and he was like, they kind of had a debate on like, what's the tone of this movie?
Sure.
Is this a serious Western? Is this a comedy? Like what kind of film are we making? I think they even halted production for a day or two as they go back with the script and kind of come to an understanding. But George said something I thought was very interesting. He said, he's like, we need to come to an understanding, but it doesn't really change my approach at all. Because he's like, directing for comedy and directing for drama are the exact same thing. All I have to do is make the audience believe me.
Yeah, I mean, I think, good directing or like meaningful. And one of the things that makes Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid such a like time-honored film in my mind is some of those elements of playfulness.
Yeah.
The fact that Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid hits such broad emotional dynamics.
It's why I cry at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, because you sincerely like those guys.
Yep.
Because you've had fun with them.
Absolutely.
Whereas you watch these tough, bad
and
cowboys
you've seen them have
through
fun.
The whole thing. Yeah.
When they're about to jump off the cliff and Sundance has to admit, I can't swim.
Mm-hmm.
There. And he just dies laughing.
Yeah.
And he's like, hell, the fall's probably going to kill you. Like, that's such a great moment to see him erupt in laughter at his friend, admitting in a moment of vulnerability. But to tie it in with comedy, it's like, I think it made me think of that because as you're writing comedy and as you're writing and you are the vessel who is telling this. I loved how you described that, the different yous that are present on stage and that are telling these jokes. You really just have to make people believe and take the journey with you. Not that, oh, I believe what he's telling me is fact. It's more like, I believe what he's telling me is funny.
Yeah.
And then it needs to be inarguably funny.
Because I think so many comics, again, just on the open mic level, I don't want to profess to. Mm-hmm. That being said, watched a lot of comedy, and then the open mics. It's like it's beautiful because you get to watch a lot of comedy that fails, and then you get to watch comedy that is runaway successful for that place and that night. And then also some of the times, and this is the best part, is you get to watch somebody succeed with a joke that they failed with the week before.
Yeah.
That they've come back and they've changed and they've tuned their presence and the material and maybe the audience is a little better that night or whatever. But it's like, but something changed about it.
Yeah.
And so you watched it fail and now it's succeeding.
Yeah.
And so exploring that like that tension and finding the truth, not of if this totally belongs to the person, but of that it is funny.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of comedians, I've noticed this like writing jokes myself, comedians sometimes waste time trying to reassure the audience that the true parts are true.
Oh, God.
And waste time selling the audience the necessary parts of the lie to be able to tell this bit. And the weird thing is that time and time again, you could strip away most of that language, and that all of that excess language, all of that like baggage and padding you're adding to this joke, makes it more likely to be less funny.
Yep.
When
I hear a comedian say, "I swear to God, this is true," I check out a little bit because I'm like, I don't care.
Right.
I don't care.
And it's more like too, because it's like, I bet that 75% of the time that person's saying they swear to God it is true, then I bet it actually happened.
I bet it did too.
It probably doesn't matter.
It's you're right. You're adding too much. You got to say more with less, and especially if you keep harping on the fact that this is a true story. Like I'm checking out more and more, not because I'm like, it's not that I don't believe you.
I only wanted to hear false things tonight, you know?
That's not, it's not what I'm here for.
No,
I'm not here for your biography.
I mean, it's the same thing of the people saying, and then my friend said, and I said, and telling this, and it's like, and that's where, again, I think that's where it's like a difficult lesson for a lot of people approaching comedy, where it's like stand-up comedy is not a conversation.
No.
And stand-up comedy is not just a funny sentence on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this very specific, and it's one of the things, too, where it's like, where stand-up comedy is, on the face of it, so simple that it also becomes scientifically or mystically complex.
Yes.
You know? And
nothing about it is easy, but it is simple.
It's a very simple form, and then, you know, a billion people could sell you the recipe of success, and then also you watch some people and it's just like pure magic. And I think to bring it back to the actual subject, I think like Norm is such a pertinent reminder of that.
Yeah.
You know, and so I listened to his special. I listened to the album special that he put out in like, I don't know, 06, 07 or something.
Yeah.
No, it was more recent than that. It was like 2011.
Yeah.
And that was his first like long special that he'd actually recorded.
Yeah.
And then there's the Hitler's Dog one that's from like 2017, 2018.
Yeah. Very recent. Pretty recent.
That's on Netflix currently. And so that was why. So I listened. I'm pretty sure you could watch the whole other one on YouTube, but I wound up just listening to it because I was doing other stuff.
Cool.
And it's on Spotify.
Yeah.
And then there's the one that's on Netflix. And so I listened to the first one in the afternoon, and I watched him last night.
Yeah.
Do the Hitler's Dog one.
I got to go back and see all of them. Oh,
and
man.
watching
I'm
it,
so sad that guy's gone.
It's such a powerful reminder. It's like, oh yeah, it's so simple.
Yeah.
And this guy has both carefully thought about it. But then he sticks to the simplicity, you know.
When he's talking about actually his father's death. Is that I think that's the 2011 one?
That's the 2011 one,
yeah.
And he talks about his uncle who dies of cancer, too, and the track is titled, on the Spotify album, is called Courageous Battle, and he is just ridiculing how, like, he's like, I just want to hear that they died. Don't tell me. This poor old guy, now you're going to say he lost a battle?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
You know? Like
he's talking
lost
about
a battle?
He's like, I'm pretty sure, and I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure when you die, the cancer dies at the same time.
Uh-huh.
That's not a loss. That's a draw.
That's a draw. That's a draw. Yeah, it was such a trip listening to that one. 2011 and reading, you know, that he'd been privately battling cancer for like 9 years. Yeah. So that either right around the time that was coming out or shortly after
got the diagnosis.
He would and you know, and it's an interesting and again to me on some level it speaks to the usual dude quality he had, and specifically that kind of like folksy down home old guy that he had clearly become over the last decade. Which is like still mentally unpacking, because I was surprised that he was only 61. You know,
boy, he didn't look a day younger than 71.
Well, and it's like it's both like, and it's both in the look of it, and then also like, I mean, like, I mean, my dad is 62. So,
Uh-huh.
you know, there's like also that like that head fuckery as we contend with our own parents getting older and all of that.
Yeah.
And then, you know, and then realizing some of the times realizing how old like this famous public figure is as compared to your dad is always like a weird. And so, but it was interesting because I was thinking about it after he passed, and I was like, yeah, like definitely, undeniably, I'd say with confidence the last 10 to 15 years, but definitely in the last 5, that he had just had this, he took on this like folksy old man quality, and it's obviously impossible to know. This is all just pissing in the wind.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, if he knew and he was fighting this battle, like if that hastened his journey into wisdom, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really curious, you know, curious thought, because it's like, and there's a line in that 2011, I'm forgetting some of the whole context, but there's a time where he says, and he's having like a fake conversation with a doctor, because he says, it's like, well, what doesn't, he says, there's the saying that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
No.
What in actuality is what doesn't kill you probably makes you weaker. And it might get you the next time it comes back.
Yeah.
You know, and so, and to hear that line, it's a great line again, and it's like, and it's just this guy playing with language, and you know, and in lesser hands it would be less, but then you think about that, or you recontextualize that as somebody who had cancer for 10 years, and you go, oh fuck.
I think as we revisit the last decade of Norm's life, I think we're going to find a lot of material that is him processing,
and that's an interesting,
his own mortality,
and that is so important to bring up, is comedy, and there are pros and cons about this, right? So I don't want to I want to tread carefully, because I don't want to like insult anybody's. But stand-up comedy has gotten so much more autobiographical over the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
There's a significant drive in stand-up comedy for people to be far more like David Sedaris up there.
Yeah.
And these personal essays, these accounting, and I think, and in a lot of ways, like, and a lot of that has both probably has to do, and it also has been good for comedy becoming this really wonderful form where people from underrepresented walks of life up to this point in time are getting up there and sharing their stories.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but comedy has become much more autobiographical.
Yeah.
To where it's like the pertinent information of
it's borderline comedy.
Well, like, and that's the thing, is I'll say that I have seen both, you know, professional touring comedians, and then met them and or, you know, heard on the albums or something. So I've seen storytelling comedy that is excellent.
Yeah.
It also lowers this bar or barrier to entry where people see the great and competent storytelling comics.
Yeah.
And they can be like, well, I'm a storyteller comic too, because when we're out drinking, the whole gang just loves my stories.
Sure.
And so in terms of like barrier to entry of like being like, are you going to write 5 minutes of jokes to get up there and go do?
Uh-huh.
Which is difficult and arduous. And
so hard.
anyone who has sat down to look at the blank page ever, whether it's art or a movie script or stand-up jokes or short story or poetry,
Hats off.
we all have seen the blank page and been like, oh, fuck.
Ugh.
Actually, I have nothing at all to say to the world. How could I have been so confused 5 minutes ago when I grabbed this pen and pad of paper? It turns out I have nothing to say. And so there's so many more people who can kind of like stumble up there with a funny story about the time, da-da-da. And, and again, if that person...
And I swear to God, this is a true story. This is a true story.
And if that person is an excellent storyteller, then that can be very entertaining.
Absolutely.
But a lot of the times it's not.
Is it stand-up, though?
And there's also this way that it's like that sort of autobiographicizing and being vaguely clever. And yeah, it feels like it should have... It feels like it could become its own separate category, which at some point, there are storytelling events, there are storytelling podcasts, but then these things make it onto Amazon or Hulu or Netflix as stand-up specials.
You're right.
And you go, well, not entirely. And so I think it's fascinating because Norm Macdonald, and again, like you said, going back through that, because there was shit in the Hitler's Dog one, which is from 2017, 2018, something like that. And I'm, of course, when you want to have them right there, I'm struggling to grasp them. But it's like, there are things that are, that were strikingly autobiographical. Now knowing that I was standing at the end of this man's life, looking back over his fixed number of achievements now, you know? And it's like, and there were things where I went, oh shit, now that joke doesn't exist just in the realm of hypothetical. Now I see how he was writing jokes about his own life, going back through these things. And that's like, and that's wild, and it's a cool testament to how strong and powerful jokes are.
Yeah.
It's like a reaffirmation because if Norm Macdonald was 30 years younger and a new comedian facing this, his set could have very possibly started with, so I've been fighting cancer, which is like, well, and again, not saying that there aren't valid performers who can make that a good story, but it also really changes the dynamic between audience and performer in that way.
And he didn't, well, I guess I read a quote from his brother saying that he kept this extremely private because he didn't want it to affect his comedy and the way his audience experienced it. And I think I'm like you in that I am a purist when it comes to comedy. In the words of Colin Quinn, get to the funny.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about stand-up. I'm also okay with opportunity being opened up to really good storytellers who also throw in a couple of jokes in there. And there's funny parts. But it's not necessarily the thing that I seek out. There are certainly storytelling comics that I love, that I think are brilliant, and they are true comics. They tell funny stories, and every ounce of that story it's littered with these little punched up moments. And then there's people who are up there kind of doing a therapy session in front of an audience that is, the audience is connecting because they're being vulnerable, and I want that kind of performance art to exist, but some of these things that you're saying are being touted as comedy specials or really just labeled as stand-up. I'm like, kinda.
Well, and that's a weird, and for me, it's like I feel like if you had greater transparency with the bill of sale, I honestly feel like there would be less tension in the communities that are absorbing these pieces of media.
Yeah.
You know, because I think, because clearly some people prefer the autobiographical storytelling thing, and then I
want to go into a room and hear all the things I'm not supposed to hear.
Yeah.
I want you to surprise me, say the thing you're not supposed to say.
Well, you know, I think that's an interesting thing is that I think that comedy, again, there's good things and bad things about this, right? But comedy has become more of a self-esteem culture over the last decade, in the same way that, like, you know, poetry or folk music, open mic nights kind of are as well, you know? And I think it's like, and so there's definitely like a contingent of people who are still like applying the main rule and metric being like, but is it funny? And then there are other people who are far more actively engaged in like the far more contemporary conversations of wokeness and
is this going to hurt somebody's feelings?
Is this
well,
powerful,
almost certainly
powerful and positive and a building experience? And it's like, and it's been made exceedingly clear over the last 5 years, you know, in the way that since Trump's election season, the tension, the temperature on the pressure cooker has just been up the whole time. Clearly, these things don't always cooperate or share space that well.
Yeah.
And there are clearly people who have like a very flexible metric because it's like, well, is it funny? And, you know, I don't think these people are like actually encouraging hate crimes.
Yeah.
And then there's also like the growing list of words and topics where it's like, hey, you know, we really don't want to hear. And it's tricky because I think that both stand-up and storytelling have always been they've always been fledgling enough forms. They're underdog enough forms that I think that they've come together because both sides could use the numbers. You know, how many spaces, how many bars or coffee shops do we need in this town on any given night that are like, oh, well, this is more of the, you know, storyteller crowd, and this is the joke teller crowd. You know, so those things share space, but I definitely agree that they are at this point practically two forms, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's another interesting thing, like, is that Norm also existed and rose to primacy in this area where big-time producers were trying to harvest and turn stand-up comedians into actors all the time. And I read a great the AV Club reposted like an interview from 2011 with Norm Macdonald, and he was talking specifically about like surviving that, because although he had a couple short-lived sitcoms and dirty work and this and that, but he never like, he was able to just show up in those shows and movies more or less just as a stand-up.
Yeah,
and
just
more
being
or less
Norm.
just as Norm. Whereas there's so many others who've been shoved into things.
Truly. It's like surviving the development deal.
And stand-up is a great pipeline for writers.
Yeah.
Because it is probably one of the most brutal and cutthroat environments for again, specifically by like the standards of like writing jokes.
Yeah.
You know, but then it's weird and funny how often, you know, you see some stand-up stuffed into a sitcom that'll run for one season. You know, Norm pointed this out in the thing, so I don't feel like I'm taking cheap shots, is he was like, he was like, even Seinfeld, the best sitcom in the world, it's not like Jerry's showing a lot of range. It was like if somebody who had no familiarity just saw an episode, they'd call it the George Costanza Show.
Yeah.
And so that's like an interesting. It's like, yeah, these guys aren't.
That's a great point.
These guys aren't actors.
Yeah.
They're excellent writers. They're good performers,
Mm-hmm.
but they're good at performing as this one character.
Their material.
Yeah.
And for Seinfeld, he and Larry David were just such a good writing team where basically Larry David is George Costanza.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just write this material that they both find so funny. And it's basically two minds creating this show, and Jerry's being Jerry. He is kind of he wears one hat.
And they put Larry into the hands of a really of an actor, And Jason Alexander, I don't really know. It's funny because he's one of those people who he's just George Costanza forever. So who knows?
He is.
But he was apparently an actor of some stature,
Really? A dramatic actor?
I think so, yeah. I think the whole range. And then,
Will Arnett, who played Job on Arrested Development, before he landed Job, he was exclusively dramatic roles.
Really?
Yeah. And that is what he wanted to be, was I want to be a dramatic actor. I want to be, I don't know.
Oh man,
what his aspirations were.
I'll be the next. So good for him. That's extra funny because so much of his humor and his characters, both in Job, but then also when he's playing Lego Batman, is just taking himself way too seriously. So it's very funny
that's a good point. He was like, I can be true to this.
BoJack?
I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I didn't see all of it.
I binged all of BoJack.
It bummed me out so much.
January.
I was just I got to back off on this show.
It was
January.
I
think I watched 2 seasons.
It was Sad Times, January 2021. I don't know if you recall, the world was melting at the time. Yeah. I felt that. So I actually, and this is another, I almost said this to you right before we started, and then we just launched into it. But I just watched, over the last week, for the first time ever, watched the first season of The Wire.
Oh,
after Michael K. Williams passed away.
Oh, yes.
Because so many people had told me, people whose opinions I really trusted, have told me over the last 20 years, being like, oh, The Wire is the best television show ever written.
Yeah, calm down, everybody.
And I'd started it.
It's really good.
I'd started it a couple times, but the first or second episode, a couple times over the last 15 years. And been like, not really in the mood for a cop show. And then...
Yeah, the Wire fans aren't hearing any of that.
Right, yeah. They're like, well, it's not a cop show.
Oh, you fucking Philistine. You don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they're
calm down. Calm down. It's a really good cop show.
Yeah, it's an excellent cop show.
It's brilliant. I'm not saying it's bad at all, but... Oh, my God. People who talk... They treat it as a subjective opinion...
Right.
That this is really good or the best show, and they treat it as fact. Oh, no.
It's really good.
It's really good.
I get the appeal. I don't know if it's the best show ever read. I'm going to start the second season. Just so you know.
Good.
I mean, I am
cool.
I'm going
Keep it
further
going.
in. Yeah,
sorry, that's my own little aside.
Omar, and I understand too. Omar,
I don't have any beef with The Wire. I have beef with Wire fans. That's all it is.
No,
they're obnoxious.
There's so many things. And I don't know, this could be over much. You could bleep his name out, but I think it's kind of funny because I saw it on your board. Anthony Cross, your next guest.
Oh, I know that guy.
He was one of the people instrumental in me cooling off on Rick and Morty.
Okay.
He was one of the first people. I think he was quoting the Pickle Rick thing, and he was just sprinkling it in conversation.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't even want this season to come out anymore. And Rick and Morty is one of those things where it's the fandom of it has caused me to sour on it a little at some point.
Uh-huh.
Still a good show.
So funny.
I watched it, but I was like,
people wearing their Rick and Morty gear out in public, and I'm like, okay, all right, like, you smoke weed, cool. What else should I know about you?
You smoke weed, you like some sci-fi, but you're over it too, and it's like, all right, that's like, and it's just, I'm sure I've liked some things like that, but never in the whole. Oh, so another was is the Death Grips. A rap group, Sacramento. Okay. Really liked the Death Grips. I liked.
Oh, I don't know them. I gotta check them out.
Their drummer is this guy Zach Hill, and he was in a band called Hella that I really was super into when I was in college. And then he started this band, the Death Grips, and they're this noisy, dark hip hop kind of project. And then Death Grips fans on the internet got so into it that I was like, oh man,
you're out.
I'm not out. But I own one Death Grip shirt, and I'm sometimes like reticent. There was a period of time where I wore it less. There was a period of time I wore it less because I was like, oh man, Death Grips mania has reached a certain fervor pitch, and I don't want somebody to see me in this shirt and be like, ugh, I've heard about you people.
Are you like, do you get this way about something that you're into that gets too popular, or you don't like the people who get really interested in it and then you leave it?
I feel like there's this way where so many things that we're encouraged to like and are being sold to us have like a way where it's like the movie that dared to say fuck you to all the movies who had come before.
Yeah.
And that particularly as a young person, when you're glomming on to various aspects of culture.
Yeah.
There's an incentive to knowing that this thing is like taboo or upending the boat.
Yeah.
And that there are probably certain specific personality types that's easier to sell to more than others. But some version of that exists for almost everybody, right? And then, again, this is like the great reveal of social media. Then you realize once I noticed that the shirts at Hot Topic, this was a high school realization, right? Once I realized that the shirts at the Hot Topic were more expensive than most shirts other places. And so, in fact, to look this disenfranchised and angry about the way the world was, I was actually paying a premium, which actually meant that I was paying into the money economy even more than some of the other people. And then so it was like I wasn't rebelling anymore. I was just being sold this idea that made me think I was rebellious.
Yeah.
That being rebellious is also a consumer checkpoint box that they're marking off about you. And man, what a sweeping moral defeat kind of moment that was. And then so once you realize so then you get drawn to a piece of culture. Oh, Rick and Morty. It's the first time that Adult Swim has done a half-hour-long family-based sitcom with an A plot and a B plot.
Yeah.
But the entire time, they are shredding the conventions of these shows. They take for granted, still got to give Rick and Morty a lot of credit, is you and I have been watching high-concept sci-fi movies for our entire conscious lives. That's a summer blockbuster. It's absurd that John David Washington still needs to grind the action of the movie to a halt to explain to Robert Pattinson that time travel exists. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking? I wanted, if anything, I would have liked Tenet 1,000 times more if just once any of those characters had cut each other off and been like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's time travel.
I've watched fucking Star Trek, man.
Yeah.
You know, like.
But in the universe
like,
that they're occupying.
Yeah. How come nobody in any time travel movies has ever watched any time travel movies?
Yeah.
You know, because
a
they
good
wouldn't
point.
get in the machine.
Yeah.
Probably. Is the problem. They're always in some parallel universe where there is no time travel media at all. And so it was like Rick and Morty was the first show acknowledging that grievous error.
Yeah.
You know, it was the first major piece of like cultural content. And people have done subversive, clever sci-fi shit probably since sci-fi has existed.
Yeah.
But it was the first time in recent memory that something was on that big of a platform and doing it with that many style points.
Mm-hmm.
Then it takes off. It becomes the hugest thing in the world. Then some of the perceived uniqueness that I have planted in my brain, being this savvy, you know, it's like and you know, it's all those sins of the early 20s, right? Where you like remember sometime out of the blue, 'cause some nights when I can't sleep, I'll think of something stupid I said 12 years ago.
Oh, it's the worst.
And I'm like, oh, yeah.
Oh, you're embarrassed in the middle of the night. And you're like,
so you go,
this is still haunting me.
And so it's sometime when you were like at a party or something and you said, well, I don't know if you know who David Lynch is, you know? And then it's like, and then you go,
yeah, guy.
You're right. And then you're like,
sure have.
You're like, yeah, we're both hip dudes drinking microbrews, you know, at a college town. Yeah.
What do you think we're into?
He's in the core curriculum.
That's hilarious.
You know? He's in the core curriculum. And so it's like, and the thing that specifically, and it's not like I realized I had to stop liking David Lynch because other people like David Lynch. Right? Although I did like scrutinize some of his movies more. You know, I was like, I don't have to like all David Lynch. I can pick and choose. You know,
that's a good point.
He did better and he did worse some of the times. It's that
I watched Twin Peaks a little bit later, like when I was a little bit older, and I was like, that was also like, okay, let's calm down on how great this show is.
Yeah, for me,
I liked a lot of moments in that show, but like even beyond it just being Lynchian, it was like there's some of this shit that's just like. Yeah, I'm good.
Well, and people will be like, well, can't you see that they're really overacting on purpose? And you go, yeah, I noticed. It doesn't make it more watchable.
Yeah,
I get that. I get that it's like a clever conceit. It doesn't mean, and when I was in my early 20s, I would feel obligated to enjoy something like that because of the clever conceit.
Yeah.
Now, I'm more like, am I enjoying this right now? I just ask my heart that question. I go, am I really enjoying this right now? And a surprising amount of artsy, pretentious shit. I'm like, nah. And I think, so I look at somebody, because, you know, deviated wildly in some good ways. But like, you know, Norm having a staying power of like, being a presence and not hearing from him every year or you know.
Well, he made a comeback. Like I think he took a long layoff after a couple of shows kind of stalled. He had a sports show at one point, he had his real sitcom, and then there was a period of time where he took some years off and then reemerged in the 2010s, like right around 2010. And came back and was doing stand-up again. Actually, I think my brother saw him in Denver at Comedy Works in like 2008, maybe.
Wow.
And I think he had been taking some time off. But thank God he did those years with Adam Egget, who was the booker at the Comedy Store.
Yeah.
And they did their podcast together.
That's cool.
Yeah. And I was very lucky that I got to spend quite a bit of time at the Comedy Store when I lived and worked in LA. And I never saw Norm. I saw Adam Egget every night.
Sure.
That guy worked so hard, and he was a fantastic hire for them. He he's part of the kind of turning around the Comedy Store. But I was spending time there because I lived with stand-up comedians, and I wanted to see if you felt this way about all your time being around comics, being a comic yourself. I found living with, hanging out with, spending time around comedians, they really had respect for your time and attention. So if they had your attention in a story, there wasn't going to be a lot of fat on the story, in that, those moments in casual conversation where somebody's like, God, was it Tuesday or was it Thursday? And you're like, does it fucking matter?
Right.
Like, I've started gently being like, if somebody starts doing that, I start being like, we're in the weeds. We're in the weeds right now.
Right.
None of this is important. But I found with comics, like, if they had your attention, they were going for the beats of the story. Like, there was a respect where it was like, I have their attention. I'm going to be interesting. Whether this is going to be funny, whether it's going to be poignant, whether it's going to be sad, they were good at structuring conversation around that. Does that
that's interesting.
ring true or resonate?
It's interesting because it's something I don't think I've consciously thought about a lot. I think it makes sense on some level, because somebody who is attempting to communicate professionally is going to be far more salient and choice in their word choice and their themes, and know how to keep it moving. But I don't know. I think, like, because I've known a lot of stand-ups with a penchant towards rambling, but oftentimes it's at least interesting or worthwhile.
Is it kind of ranty, or is it just a ramble?
I mean, both. It depends on the personality,
style,
right? I think one thing that's tough and funny about stand-up comedians is some people, is like some of the times you go to an open mic, and some people have a very tough time being off.
Yeah.
Like, they're always on. And I'll have been at like a barbecue or a bar with somebody I know from the open mic comedy scene, and I'll be like, are they running material on me right now?
Oh no, that's the worst.
So there's this weird, like, but a lot of it, but I mean, and then it's a fun, funny group of people, and the instant you've taken a group of people, and especially because like talking to filmmakers is interesting, and a lot of them are creative and funny, but film is so far away from having a conversation with another person. Whereas stand-up is kind of the art of doing something that is often confused for a conversation. So it's like you're getting closer to the practice. I wonder if your experience would be accentuated or different, because in my experience with people living in LA, which is obviously far more limited because I've visited there once or twice, but I've never lived in LA. Is like most people, especially if they're periphery to the industry in any way, a lot of them have know that there are stakes and objectives in every conversation. Which, until they've consumed a certain amount of cocaine, is like a driving factor and facet in almost every conversation. Yeah, I mean, comics are fun people to hang out with, and then can also be exhausting.
Absolutely.
Really exhausting. And then I found, and one of the reasons why I'm keeping a governor on how many nights a week I'll go do stand up now. And it's like, because there was a period of time, like when I was like 23 through 25, where I was just living and breathing comedy.
Yeah.
And it was the only thing that mattered.
Mm-hmm.
And it made it much more difficult for me to communicate with the civilians. You know?
Truly.
Even like on stage.
Yeah.
At some show, I've sometimes worried that at the open mics that I've become somewhat of like a comedian's comedian.
Ooh, yeah.
Because like, especially when you're doing just mostly open mics, it's like you're performing.
You're playing for the back of the room.
For the comics.
Yeah.
And
it's dangerous.
And, you know, and that's like, and then so some of the times you put some civilians in there, just regular nice people.
Yeah.
And I found the period of time in my life when I was doing comedy 4 to 6 nights out of the week.
Yeah.
That I had very little to say and very little in common all of a sudden with these like actual human beings.
Yeah.
Who'd show up here. It's like, oh, give me a room full of the mutants again, you know, please, for the love of God, you know? And that's so like, you know, and that's one of the things where it's like Norm. Because isn't it always the tragedy of like a famous person who is just a worker who was famous and was making a living off of it, but then when they die, all of a sudden, like, you know, it's the one day ever that everybody is posting about them.
Oh,
you
truly.
Know? And so
no one did this when he was still kicking.
So it's interesting because it's like it speaks to the fact that like Norm was a comedian's comedian. As well as being a comedian, but there was something about, or it's like that there was this thing that people truly admired about it, and other professionals truly admired about it. But as opposed to every podcast being like, "Can we get Norm Macdonald on here or anything?" Now instead, you know, everybody's oh, what a loss, and that's kind of the irony, you know, is it's like. Some days if, you know, you just think, and it's like, well, what's getting recorded for future people? Or what will people, and that, again, when I was talking about yourself over here and yourself over here and writing for this, which is a head fuck both in terms of writing and performing stand-up material, and then it was also a huge head fuck to just think about in your life, you know? And so, yeah, you know, it's like that guy left a big impression on a lot of people.
Yeah. I actually was living in L.A. when James Gandolfini died, and I couldn't believe that. So I was friends with a lot of actors and comedians, and I couldn't believe the number of people who were making it about them when Gandolfini died. Now, I'm not seeing the same thing with there's just a lot of tribute to Norm, and I appreciate that. The ones I really love are fellow comedians who are posting pictures that they took with Norm just at a hang. They're just in a booth at a restaurant. I think that's super cool. But that one was especially disturbing when Gandolfini passed away, and people were like, it's just so many people like, he's the reason I got into acting. And you know, this hurts me so much more than people would ever see on the surface, because and it's like, is this about you now? Like,
and it's also, shit. And it's like, and this is not to besmirch the career or craft of James Gandolfini, but it's like, Tony Soprano got you into acting?
Yeah.
Of all of the, like, he's great in it, you know? But it's like, you can only really say that to me if you're like a gruff, portly man.
Yeah, if you're like, wait, so the guy who beat the shit out of Rosanna Arquette in True Romance,
right?
He was your inspiration?
That was like the... Yeah, it should have.
I mean, he's great in all those roles.
It should have been just a bunch of hairy fat guys. Oh, you know, James Gandolfini's.
I like a good sauce.
Yeah, I
just like my man Jimmy.
I mean, I was working at a record store when David Bowie died, and when Prince died, because they both died like right around.
They did,
and it was like,
2014.
Everybody had just learned their whole fucking selves.
2015? 2016?
Yeah, I think it was
2015.
I think it was 2015. Everybody.
I saw him in 2014.
Everybody had just learned their whole selves.
Yeah.
From Bowie and Prince.
Yeah.
And they're both incredible musicians. I'm not trying to disparage, but it was like I had no idea how crucial he was to the fundament and firmament. Either of them.
Yeah.
Were to the fundament and firmament of our current society.
Yeah.
And everybody was just so crushed. And I was working in a record store. I opened it this morning, and I got a call from my bosses about 45 minutes into the workday, and they were like, David Bowie just died. Add $20 to the price tag of each of the records.
Whoa.
You know, because, I mean, it just shot. We were in a used store, and it just shot the valuation of all of having them on vinyl.
You're running a business.
You got
to do it.
Running a business. Well, and it's like, again, and it would be different if one or two people or of a relatively small share of people were like, oh, my God. You know, but all of a sudden, these guys died, especially with Bowie, more so with Bowie, where it was like, all of a sudden, everybody... It's like, you know, Bowie was responsible for everyone still being alive. Yeah. And also for being sexual beings.
Uh-huh.
And it's like weird. I've known you for 3 or 4 years, and like I never, like, if I'd shown up here and I was like, the only reason I've ever done comedy is because of Norm Macdonald.
Uh-huh.
I was like, no. I thought it was super fucking funny.
It's just awesome.
And I watched a bunch of them yesterday,
and
I was like, God damn, this guy's really funny. I watched some of his show on Netflix that's like the newest interview show. I watched some of that maybe 6 months ago, and I was like, it was all right.
Wasn't my favorite format for Norm.
No, it was kind of, I liked that it was super casual.
Honestly, I'm not crazy about him. Like, I prefer him not being the host.
Yeah. It's funny because him being like, I saw one headline refer to him as the best worst guest.
Yeah.
As the best worst guest of late night shows, and yeah, not a great host.
Yeah.
Excellent guest. Excellent guest. So it's one of those things where I'm like, also I wasn't like hard pressed to watch the people he was having on.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, I
like the Letterman one because they got so close over the years.
Yeah, they got great hit. I mean, but it's like, but yeah, I was like, I don't need to catch up with David Spade.
Yeah.
And if David Spade dies tomorrow, then I'll change my answer. And I'll be like, oh my God, you know, oh my God, the Spadester, you know, not the Spadester. But I'm like, you know, that guy was always kind of irritating.
Is there let's end this on a Norm joke. Is there a Norm joke that always, like, there's one that just lives in my head. Is there one that like lives in your head that just always makes you smile? That's always
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd briefly forgotten about it. And in watching it, I was like, it was one of those ones I tried to like film it and put it on the internet, and it was too long of a video or whatever. But it's it's from the Hitler's Dog one.
Yeah.
And he's like, do you want me to just? I don't know if I should try and do it.
I
or
want
what
you to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, just or like, do it in the Nick Holland style.
It was like when I was a young guy. You know, I was pretty crazy. I tried all the drugs, whatever I could get my hands on, and the craziest drug I ever did was acid. And the thing about acid is they tell you when you're a kid, they say, you know, you can take acid, and then 10 years later or 20 years later, you can have a flashback of your acid trip. And you know, I always tried to spend smart money with my drugs. And I was like, well, that's a lot of bang for your buck, you know, to pay $5, get high now, and then get high again 10, 20 years later. So I went, I bought some acid and I did it, and it was crazy. But they were lying. It's been 10 years. It's been 20 years. Sadly, it's been 30 years, and I have had no flashback. And not to get too political or anything, but that's classic big acid.
More lies from big acid.
More lies from big acid.
I love that.
I forget. And he has some other tag he adds on.
I see myself as somebody who likes to stretch his drug dollar.
Yeah, stretch his drug dollar out. Yeah.
More
so lies from big acid. And I think he did that on Hitler's Dog, and he does a shortened version of it on his last Letterman appearance.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I was like,
and so that one, and to me, it's like, it's all of it because it's long and it's rambling, and then it zips itself up into such a like cute little, that is still somehow a surprising left turn or juke.
Yeah. Truly.
Yeah, what's yours?
Well, you're so right with the rambling part, and I want to just say that Louis always talks about like all my ums and ahs and pauses and stuff. He's like, they're there by design. They're supposed to make me sound rambly. I actually think a shout out to another comedian who just released an awesome special, one of the funniest ones I've seen in a long time. Shane Gillis released it free on YouTube. Shane Gillis live from Austin. Check it out if you haven't seen it yet. He also has a similar rambling style. I think Norm does that too in his structure. The joke I'm going to end on is actually one of Norm's real tight ones.
Okay.
And where he just writes it on a note card. And he says, "Now they say pimpin' ain't easy, but what they don't tell you is how difficult it is to be a prostitute."
Oh, what a legend.
Norm Macdonald.
What a legend.
We love you. We will miss you. You are the true performer of what Mark Norman says, comedy. Nick, thanks for coming in and talking about this.
Thank you for having me.
Tribute to Norm Macdonald.
Yeah.
That's it. We're out.
Awesome.